Hi, Navpreet. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm actually quite excited for you to come on because I've been following you for a bit now, and I've been completely inspired with your poetry that you post on social media. So I am going to start off with a question that I'd really like to know, because we all know you as Nav the Poet.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'd like to ask you is, who was Navpreet Singh before Nav the Poet was born?
That's a good question to start off with. Navpreet Singh was Navpreet Sakdev, because that's how everybody referred to me and no one could pronounce my name.
Right.
Um, and the reason I bring that up is because I didn't acknowledge back then the significance of my identity and my roots. So I
Yeah.
just let people, like, I gave them that permission to mispronounce and misidentify me. So that was a big thing that as I wrote and I discovered myself, connecting to my roots became a much more focus of my journey. But before that, I can just use words because it's hard to put into sentences. So it's just
Yeah. Perfect.
lost, confused, insecure, um, also arrogant for some reason. I think that was to mask my insecurity. So I just was really, really just like, egotistical about things. Like, I don't drink and I'm better than people because it was stupid, but it was dealing with a lot of, personal struggles and emotional turmoil within. Um, yeah, just lost is like probably the biggest word. Is just I didn't know what purpose I had or what I was supposed to do or who I even was.
Mm.
Um, and quite literally, poetry saved my life and helped me grow into who you see before you now.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just, I'd like to ask, when you say those words out loud, when you say words like lost, um, how does that make you feel? Because obviously you've grown from then.
Mm-hmm.
But how does it make you feel hearing those words now?
It's a weird but good feeling because I still can. I don't feel the same way I did back then, but I can still kind of revisit those feelings, those thoughts, and how I was back then. And so to be able to literally look, like, experience what I felt, and now look at who and what I do now and everything,
Yeah.
and not have those feelings and not have that mental, just absolute uh, confusion and frustration. It's 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 overwhelmingly a good feeling because I can see and feel my growth. Like, it's not just, oh, I can acknowledge that I'm different. I feel it because I don't think that way anymore. I don't think of myself as insignificant and worthless. Like, that's a word I used a lot back in, before I started writing poetry. I just really felt worthless. And so that feeling isn't there anymore, and it's like this beautiful experience I get to have in my, just anytime I want to think about it. And like, it really helps me anytime I am feeling down, because I just think about what I've accomplished and where I was at one point in my life, and how that's not who I am anymore, and who I'm choosing not to be. I'm choosing to be someone else.
That's really inspiring. And so for people out there that sort of are in your position, are feeling those sort of feelings now, like, as part of your sort of healing process, do you know why you felt like that? Do you have that understanding for yourself? Because a lot of discussions I have, cultural pressures, we've talked about representation, something that we didn't have, and I talk a lot about identity as well, and sort of the racism that I had
Mm-hmm.
around me. So I can connect with you because of experiencing all that. But do you have anything specific? Do you know why you went through?
Yeah, it it's a lot of just judgment and like belittlement I faced. And it was, yes, a lot of it was from racism and racial prejudice, but it
Yeah.
also stemmed from within my own community or people that I knew. Where so I'm born and raised in the US, and I grew up in a fairly Western white neighborhood. And
Mm.
so my exposure and most of my time was around white people and or non-Desis, non-South Asians. So I wasn't connected to the culture. And so whereas a lot of kids loved like, you know, Punjabi music or Bhangra music, whatever,
Yeah.
I liked rock music. I love rock music. And to them, that was weird. To them, it was weird that I liked rock music. And it wasn't just like, oh, he's weird. It was like, we're going to make fun of you because you're weird. And I'm just, it's these little things that shouldn't matter that people made a big deal of. And I couldn't process why that was such a big deal. And that's what frustrated me, is like, I'm just living my life. I happen to like rock music. I happen to wear all black, and I happen to whatever, do my own thing. And it's a problem for you. And I couldn't understand why it was a problem. And that's what just ate away at my self-worth and confidence, because I just had to deal with this and I didn't know why. Like when you don't know why about things, it just gets more frustrating, because at least if you know the why, you can understand. Even if you don't, you know, even if it's not a valid reason, you can at least understand why someone does something. And, you know, but when you can't understand why, these little things that shouldn't matter, or people need to make a big deal of it, for me, it just really just hurt me. And so I just started to wonder, like, okay, clearly there's something. I started to think there's something wrong with me, because I keep hearing from people that there's something weird or off about me. And granted, I'm a bit of a kooky character, but like it went beyond just being like a little, you know, eccentric or something like that. It was just, it made me feel like I didn't matter.
Yeah.
And also growing up in a South Asian community where, especially as a man, expressing emotions isn't encouraged. You're not, you know, told go talk to other guys or go talk to your guy friends or your dad. Like my dad, love him so much, but talking to him about anything emotional is one of the hardest like adventures in the world for me.
Yeah.
And so all that frustration, no outlet, and you get to a point where you just you don't know what to do.
Yeah. And as we've like mentioned, when it comes to our parents, that sort of generation before us, I'm not sure if they know how to show emotion. I'm not sure they were taught. I'm not sure, you know, we've talked about how showing emotion even for happiness,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for other people, it's really hard. So how are we supposed to expect sort of them to sort of be open and honest about how they're feeling if actually they can't even express happiness? And also they don't know because of the previous generation before that. So it's about sort of ending that cycle, really.
Mm-hmm.
And you've also talked about you didn't have representation growing up,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a conflict in itself, isn't it?
Right. And another thing about our parents too is, I don't know obviously about your parents, but my parents immigrated from India, right? And so they didn't have the luxury of like looking at these things and working on themselves in that way. They just had to make a living.
Yeah.
And my dad's still 30 years later, still just making a living so that I don't have to just make a living. So like I don't hold anything against them, but like that's just another thing that I feel is part of the discussion, is that they didn't really have the opportunity. Not only did they not learn about it, right? But then any opportunity to learn about it was also not there because they came here, or in your case, the UK, and they had to just work and live and
Yeah.
survive.
That layers it, doesn't it? Because actually now we have this layer of guilt
Mm-hmm.
that we're feeling like this, and we're sort of exposing ourselves, saying, you know, this is how I felt. Because what the problem with communities as well is, it's like that's a reflection on our parents, and that's actually not what we're saying at all.
Right.
We're actually just trying to break that cycle to say, but let's end that cycle, because you know, there's going to be a generation of children after us as well. And I think that really adds to, you know, you feeling lost and vulnerable, and that adds to it, which is sad but true. I sort of want to ask you, so you say that you were lost and, you know, again, vulnerable. What made you decide to pick up the pen and write poetry? What do you remember? That was there a moment, or was there a feeling?
That is a question I have asked myself many times, because I do not know the actual reason. I leave it to, because I'm a person of faith, so I leave it to God put the pen in my hand, and that's how I've always viewed it, for multiple reasons. But I don't know what it was. I had gone to an event in, I think, 2010, where I actually saw some Sikh hip hop artists, like hip hop artists who were of the Sikh faith.
No way. Amazing.
Yeah, yeah. So like, there's the guys like, I don't know if you've heard of them, but like Humble the Poet, and Houdini is another guy. And so I guess that was the first time I saw some sort of representation, some sort of people that looked like me that were doing something not so conventional and typical of South Asians, you know, doctor, lawyer, engineer, these kinds of routes. And they were just expressing themselves. And I think that made it, I didn't go home and write after that, but I think that kind of sat in my head, and I started to think, oh, people are doing this. Okay, there's, you know, and then I just, yeah, one day in class in college, I was so bored and tired of everything else. And I just started writing. And then by the end of the class, I had a whole poem written. And I was just, what did I do? Like, how did I do this? Where did this come from? Because the one thing I do tell people is poetry comes really, like writing comes really easily to me. And I don't say that to be arrogant or sound, you know, but it just does, where like I can write a poem in 5 minutes and I'm done. And a lot of people struggle with writing, and it's just not a struggle for me, because I believe that I'm not writing. I just believe that I'm just this vessel for the divine. And so it's just speaking through me, these words. And so, and I feel really grateful about that fact that I have this ability to just write and do it, you know, in a quick time. So yeah, when it happened, it was this weird kind of moment of, you know, almost like I was not even really mentally aware.
Like an epiphany.
Not even an epiphany. It was like, while I was writing, I was kind of like not there. It was just like something else took over, kind of thing. Like wasn't really, yeah, because it was like a good page or two. And I was just, it's like, how did this even happen? Like, I've never really written before. I mean, like, other than class projects or essays, things like that, but I've never done any creative writing, really. So I didn't know where this ability to write and rhyme came from. I was just baffled that I could do this.
Wow. And when you start, so you just started writing and then you started performing it, or you just, what was that? What was that process?
Yeah, so I started writing in 2011, in maybe spring of 2011. I don't know the exact timeline, but early 2011. And the winter of 2010 was when I went to that event where I saw those artists.
Yeah.
So the organizers were doing the same event in 2011. And for some reason, I just said, you know what, let's just go perform. I don't know why. I've never performed in front of people before.
You've never performed?
Nope.
Not in front of family, friends?
No, I'd never performed ever.
Wow.
And something just compelled me to go, just do it. Just do it, see what happens. And December 2011, I went and performed at this event in front of 300 plus people. And
Where was it? Where was the event?
it was in New Jersey.
New Jersey, okay.
Yeah. So first time performing ever, and I'm performing in front of 300 people. My poetry, which at the time I'm still this shy, nervous, uncertain, you know, doubtful kid, and I'm performing in front of a whole group of my own community who can be very judgmental at times. But I just did it. It was a 2-minute piece, and performance itself was fine. I have video. I don't like it, but it's fine for our first performance. But like, the crowd really enjoyed it. The response was great, and I walked off stage. No joke. I walked off stage. In my mind, I said, this is what I want to do with my life. That's it. I know it.
Oh, that's amazing, because there's so many people out there, especially our generation, that do not have, even now, still do not have a clue who they are and what they want to do in life. And that's one of the reasons why I did this, because on my blogging, I talk about inspiring people like South Asians, or, you know, anyone of color really, that are in the creative field. Because in our culture, a creative field isn't a place where it earns money, you know, not that doctor, lawyer, and it's still sort of there, that layer of judgment that people have. And so when you performed, did you go home and tell your family about the performance? Is that when you came out to them to say, this is what I want to do?
Oh no, didn't do that right away. No, I spent the next semester of college just exploring because I was an engineering major at the time. Um,
Very
yeah,
different. Very
yeah,
different.
yeah. And so, but I knew I wanted to do poetry, but I'm not going to do a degree in poetry. I don't know what I'm going to do with that. And
Yeah.
so I was trying to figure out, what do I do? Do I switch? Do I transfer schools and all this stuff? And one day at school, my friend, he was part of our college's radio station, and he was like, "Why don't you just come on the show with me?" I was like, "Okay, I don't know what I'm going to say or do." But like I was with him on the show. We had a fun time. You know, he like shares his taste of music, but then he also talked to me. I think I shared a poem. I don't even remember. Don't really remember what that day was like. But all I remember was going, wait, this is really cool. This is a platform. Like this is a thing. Like our community never exposes us to these avenues, but like radio, film, television, these are also avenues which you can make money and a career. And it doesn't have to be on screen or on, the radio. You can be an editor, a writer, like there's so many different options. And so I just went, this is really cool. I want a way to share my voice. Maybe this is it. So I decided to switch majors and I went from engineering to communication arts, which is just a general media major. Um, and then so I switched without anybody really influencing me. I kind of just kept it to myself, and I was like, do I want to do this? I spent time thinking about it. I didn't just do it right away. I was like, is this the right decision for me? And the more I spent time with my friend and explored the field and the major, I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. So I switched. Then I told my parents.
Oh wow, did you? And what was
Yeah,
their reaction?
they were hesitant, but my parents, I'm really grateful that my parents are really supportive of what I do. And I told my dad, he was like, what are you gonna do? And I said, I don't know. I literally just switched, so I don't know what I'm going to do. But I love this, like this outlet, this creativity, this space, and so I'm going to find a way to be successful. That's what I told him, and he said, okay, and that was it.
Wow. That was quite a brave thing to do, just switching and then telling them, because it's sort of like, I like you doing, I actually, that's a great way of doing it, because if you hadn't, and if they'd swayed you,
Hmm.
it would have been easier so you actually did the hard bit first.
Right. Yeah. I didn't want anybody to sway me because I knew my parents would. If I was like, oh, I'm thinking about it, then they'd say, well, they try to give me all the reasons you shouldn't and all the reasons engineering is more stable and secure and all these, practical reasons. And I didn't want any of that because I wanted to make sure that the decision I was making was not only my own, but actually what I wanted and what was right. So I spent that semester thinking about it. I didn't switch till the end of the semester. So it was a good 4 months or whatever the semester is. I don't know anymore. But I spent that whole time pondering and questioning if this is the right decision. So it wasn't rash. It wasn't just this, I just decided to do something suddenly. I really thought about it and made sure that if I was going to do it, how would I, or like what, would I feel right doing it? Or would I end up just going back to engineering because it's something I can rely on, kind of thing?
Yeah. Is that the first time that you actually took some sort of control in your life, would you say?
Now that I think about it, I mean, probably the performance, going and performing for the first time, but yeah, that whole time period was like really the first time I've just made decisions for myself and for what felt good to me, regardless of what anyone else thought or wanted, right? Because I was so bogged down by what other people thought of me and what they felt and how they viewed me. And that's what was dictating how I was living my life. I was like, oh, well, if people don't like how I am, then I'll just shut myself in and I won't be myself. I won't express myself the way I like. And literally from the moment I started performing and changed my major, even at school, I would just do things that I liked doing, like just walking around campus, but like dancing around campus. And
No.
like people see me and they're just like, who is this guy? And I just didn't care. I
Yeah.
was just so happy. And as time went on, people would come up to me and be like, you're the guy that's always dancing. I love your energy, man. And I was like, see, this is what happens when you choose to be yourself and not worry what other people think. There will be people who will think you're weird and judge you, but there'll also be people who appreciate the fact that you're just enjoying yourself and you're living your life as you feel fit.
It's actually listening to it. It sounds like you were liberated.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
how.
100%. Like the change from in every aspect, from my grades to my moods to my energy, from when I like poetry and changing my major that whole year, those 2 semesters, just complete 180. I was just already had I become like a different person from who I was. And that was still just the beginning, because
Yeah,
like even now I'm a way more evolved person than who I was back then.
that's really amazing to hear. And I want to talk a bit more about your poetry because
Mhm.
obviously linking into your younger self and feeling lost. Um, what did you start writing and how has it evolved?
So a lot of what I started writing was about my identity and the harassment and discrimination I had faced and the struggles of that. And
Yeah.
um, other than that, also there was, so at the time that this whole was going on, I'd gotten out of a relationship. So there was a lot of heartbreak poems as well. I think a lot of artists start from heartbreak, but so it was just, yeah, it was a lot of, in general though, it was just exploring all these feelings I had, whatever they may be, whether it was hurt or frustration or just like worry, insecurity, anger. There's all these different emotions that I didn't know how to express, didn't feel like I had an outlet of to express them. And this was my way, and like this was just this path of getting those things out. Because I've noticed, and I tell this to other people, whatever you have going on in your head, write it down, because it's a totally different voice when you read it back. It's not like you're saying it to yourself, thinking in your head. You're reading it, and it feels like it's someone else
Yeah.
saying these words.
Yeah.
And I've always noticed I can help other people so much easier than I can help myself. So if I look at that paper that I've just written my thoughts on as someone else, maybe I can give them advice, and then I realize I'm giving myself advice. So yeah, it was just a lot of those internal struggles I was dealing with. That's a lot of what my writing was. And now, because I've garnered a bit of a following, and people pay attention to what I do, it's still always about me, but I am aware of like the fact that this could connect with people. But I still just speak from my own experiences, because that's all I can speak from. I can't speak from anyone else's perspective. So I share my experiences. A lot of it is into my faith now, because I've grown so much in my faith. A lot of it is still self-love, because I was writing back then about a lack of self-worth, but now I'm writing about like appreciating myself and loving myself. So it's this shift of how I used to view myself, and now how I'm working to view myself, and what I'm working to give myself, which is love.
Oh, that's really good to hear. It's really nice just even hearing you say that. Talking about self-love,
Mm-hmm.
um, we also connected. We talked about like body image.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about, because obviously we connected with a post of, we, the first person we need to apologize to is ourselves. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason I know I put a post on like that is because I've really taken, I talk a lot about image, beauty, and
Mm-hmm.
with that is body image.
Right.
And I've always had this issue with weight. I think that's a major one, but weight, being a certain weight, but also the fact of my dark skin as well.
Yep.
And and I've also had a child. And one day I just started thinking about myself, and I started realizing that actually the first person I need to apologize is to me, because
Mm-hmm.
actually I've really put myself down. Forget about everyone else, but actually
Mm-hmm.
the fact that I listened to those people, I agreed with those people that I should be a certain way, I should not wear certain colored clothes because
Mm-hmm.
it would look wrong against my dark skin. Like, I listened
Mm-hmm.
to that. And you talk about evolving, and from the younger person that you were, I've suddenly really appreciated everything. But with appreciating myself, I have got to appreciate the sort of my perfect imperfections that I have.
Mm-hmm.
that I like, that's how I like to say it, and a lot of that is to do with my scars from acne, and also my stretch marks as well. I've had, especially from having a child, but also growing up, just being a normal person. And tell me your thoughts on that, like on your sort of body image, that you've had self-esteem issues. What's your take on that, on your body image, and how has that evolved?
For me, it's interesting because, and we've talked about this, but so I was born with a heart condition. So I had surgery when I was just a couple of days old, couple of weeks old. So that, and I've had subsequent surgeries throughout my life, and that's left a scar on my chest. And I've always felt uncomfortable about this scar, even though it's the only reason I'm alive is because of the surgeries and everything. But it doesn't change the fact that when you walk around and you see an ad and there's, you know, always like these attractive like models, and there's like, our society has such an emphasis on that appearance, and like especially growing up in the West, right? Whereas like if I grew up in India, it might be somewhat different. I don't know. I mean, now they're pretty like westernized, but like growing up in the West, and like you're the only kid with a turban, you're the only kid with a beard, the only kid with dark skin. Even like I was one of the few South Asians in my school, at least earlier on. Later on there were more, but still, like I still have this unique identity that isn't looked fondly on. Like people don't love my look, especially not back then. You know, 9/11 was just still like really fresh in people's minds, and so this image was this harrowing, you know, it gave these people these harrowing feelings. So, you know, and then you're in high school, and like all the kids are worried about like looks and things like that, and like you're worried about, you know, getting girls and this kind of thing, and like they're not attracted to this, and so it's just a lot to really deal with, because there's so much of this pressure put on us as a society and in school and everything of like how we need to look. And so yeah, it's still like, that's the part that I haven't worked on as much. It's part of my self-worth, but like for me, the self-worth has always been more of a mental, emotional state thing. But the body image is something that now I'm like, I need to address it more. But it's definitely gotten better still, even though I haven't really put too much energy into like working on it. It's gotten better just naturally, because I like myself more in general, and like my strength and my faith, this is probably the biggest thing. My turban and my beard are probably the biggest things that I used to be really, you know, insecure or worried about, because I know what the image is and the view is of people who look like this. And so, but like I've so much strength and the love for my faith that part doesn't even phase me anymore. Like I couldn't care less what people say about me because of this. I love this look, honestly. I love my beard. It's great. And you know, the value of my turban, my dastard is really important. And so it's definitely evolved, and I'm still working on it, and I still got a lot of work to do.
So if I asked you what's your favorite part of your body, would you be able to answer that?
Huh. Let me think about that. I would probably say my beard. I don't look at myself a lot either. Like I don't know if it's just because of the family I grew up in. We've never been like focused on appearance in that way, where it's not like I'm neglecting it, but also just like I do enough to look nice and presentable, but I don't put too much thought and effort other than like my turban and my outfit. But that's like the most my physical appearance really gets. That's the most attention my physical appearance gets, in terms of like looking good. So, but yeah, I love my beard. It's really nice.
Right. But in some ways, some of the things that you were saying, as a female, I think that's actually the dream, to actually not having to worry. No, and actually, you know, for you, your talent is your voice. But I think, particularly for a girl, the pressures of beauty, makeup, and that kind of thing, which you're pushed from quite a young age. That actually, what you're saying, I'm thinking, wow, I would love that. I would love to just go out and not worry about what I'm going to wear, and, you know, like how I'm going to look and stuff. So I definitely think maybe maybe women are a bit more pressured on it. I don't know, but
Oh, absolutely. I would 100% agree with that because, like, I'm obviously not a woman, so I don't experience it, but I see it. I have a lot of friends, and I just, because I'm on social media a lot, I explore the comment sections of things a lot. I find it a fascinating world to explore comments. And so I see those comments a lot. And I never get comments about I need to look a certain way.
yeah,
But I see women get comments that they need to look a certain way all the time.
yeah.
But I did want to actually ask you a question, since you
Wow.
said like you would love to go out and not worry. My question is, why don't you?
Well, I do, and that's what. So so I will go and do the school run without makeup,
Mm-hmm.
and so I've never been so insecure because I really neglect my hair. I'm terrible with my hair. I just, if it comes to the least favorite part, it's actually my hair. But I do, but I think it's two things. I'm consciously doing it to get over that sort of to get over that not even fear, but that complex.
Right.
But there's also part of me that, so I'm doing it consciously, but also there's part of me that it's actually part of me. I don't wear makeup every day, and and I'm not going to lie, a lot of it is because I'm a mum now. And everyone has their their moments. So, thankfully for you, it was quite early, but for me it was I have to lead by example. I just didn't want to be a woman showing my daughter that, like with me, don't wear that tone of lipstick, wear that, and actually, we've got family coming over, put makeup on. I didn't want to be that person, and I've
Right.
seen that on other people as well, and it's not nice, and I know how it makes me feel. So I didn't want that on my daughter. So there's two bits to it for me.
That's so interesting. And that's why I was asking that question. I didn't want to seem like
I've
rude,
never
by
been
the
asked
way, but
a question, so thank you.
it's just like for me it's really interesting to get that perspective, because obviously I don't know fully what that, I'll never know what that's like. And like, so when I even talk about gender inequality in my poetry or my other kind of posts, I'm not worried, but I'm always cautious about presenting the idea
Yeah.
properly and accurately, because I can't get that full scope since I'm not a woman. So like, I'm always intrigued by how women receive the content I put out related to gender and things like that, because
Oh, it's all relevant. It's all massively relevant, and universal as well, which I think is why you're quite popular. It's because a lot of the things that you're saying is universal. It's not just for, it's not, your audience isn't another Sikh man. And when you talk about makeup, I would say the comparison to you surely would be your beard and your turban, because
probably.
actually an easy, not easy, because I know it's hard, but an easier way for you to grow up would have been to not have a beard and not have a turban. So it's actually consciously thinking, I would presume, I don't want to, but
Yeah.
that would be the comparison for a guy.
Yeah, and it does take me some time.
Yeah.
I do take time to get it all ready. Like when I shower, after I shower, I use a hair dryer and a brush to just kind of like shape my beard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I have like a scruffner, like a cream that I use. And my turban, also, it takes me like 10-12 minutes to tie. So like, it is a process.
Yeah. But also when it's sort of that sort of connection to representation as well. It's not something that you saw. So actually, because you didn't see it, and to that sort of thing of being accepted, you say, you grew up in a white neighborhood. That would have been an easier option to get your hair cut, not grow a beard. So it's consciously you're doing it because it's part of your truth. I don't want to, but also the fact that you want to be that representation.
Yeah. I've had friends who cut their hair. I know a lot of people who have chosen, for whatever reason, it's no judgment to them, but they've chosen to not follow this path. And I believe that this is my path, and I want those who feel this is their path to have someone to look to to be able to know that it's possible, right? Because that's the biggest thing, is how do you do that if like nobody's ever done it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it sounds so ridiculous sometimes to people who I guess don't get it because they might have all the representation in the world, but when you don't see yourself reflected accurately in media, which is a huge, you know, aspect of our society. And like I said, I studied film and television, so there's this whole thing called cultivation theory, and it's the idea that media impacts society's perception of things.
Massively.
And there's been plenty of studies, and like it's obvious, but like there's studies that have been done to support this theory. And it's just like the biggest example I use is I don't know how familiar you are with this because it's a film, it's an American film, but it was called Birth of a Nation.
No.
So it came out in like 1915, I want to say. But Birth of a Nation was used as a propaganda tool to recruit members of the KKK. It was used, and it led to the resurgence of that organization. That's what representation does, because they were shown as the heroes of the South.
Yeah.
That's what the movie was depicting them as. That like that black people were the villains, and they were deteriorating society, and the KKK were saving the South from this disease, or whatever you want to call it, quote unquote. And then someone used that to rebuild the organization. That's what representation does. It gives people encouragement. It makes them feel that what they believe, what they feel, what they identify with is valid. And like that to me is like the worst representation ever, but it worked.
But it sort of things like that are done so sort of, it gets to your subconscious. It's not even sort of like the physical, you're watching a film, it's actually getting into that mind, and it going into your mind and going through a thought process and influencing you, not even knowingly.
Right.
That's mind-blowing, isn't it?
Yeah, I saw the movie Wonder Woman when it came out, right? And it takes place in World War One.
Yeah.
So they were in a scene at a train station, and it takes place in World War One in this scene they were in London or somewhere in the UK. And in the background, just in the background, were a couple of Sikh soldiers. I was like, that's really accurate. Like the fact that you threw that in there is incredible. Like, because there were a lot of Sikhs who served in the British Army. And you didn't have to put that in there, but they felt that's like historically accurate. And I went, that's even better representation than I've ever seen in 20 years.
Yeah, it's funny because there's conversations I'm sort of having with like fellow bloggers and influencers and stuff, and they talk about tokenism. And like my take on that, like that exact example, I'm like, well, even if it is tokenism, you know, we've got to start somewhere. It's probably going to start as tokenism.
Right.
However, you know, it will then hopefully organically, naturally, you know, evolve into, you know, it being just quite normal. We have to normalize what we're trying to see. And part of that is to, you know, do the right thing and be authentic.
Right.
To the story, to the time. Yeah, no, I totally agree. So what's your sort of goal when it comes to poetry? Because poetry is still, so we've got someone quite well known here called Hussein Manoir, who I've actually interviewed, and he's very, very well known here. It's been reported he's had tea with Prince Charles at his residence. Yeah, so he's known to the royal family. He's been on TV. He's actually written for a well-known soap here called Hollyoaks. So he's very, very popular here. And he's also in this genre of the spoken word, the poetry, or the spoken word. But it's still sort of a genre that I think is still up and coming, I would say. I mean, obviously there's you doing it, and you know, you're quite popular, and also Hussein Manoir. How do you reckon it's going to just explode, or do you think it's sort of underground still and it's sort of there? But why do you think it's not still as popular as other genres?
So to answer the last question first of why I think it's not as popular, I think it's because we're never really shown poetry in school, right? I don't know what it's like in the UK, but I imagine it's the same. But we're only ever shown Shakespeare, maybe some Robert Frost, Walt Whitman, these well-known, famous, authors, poets, and there's nothing wrong with their content, but that doesn't resonate with the kid in 2018, 2020. That didn't resonate with me when I was in high school. Like, it was interesting because I like stories, so it still had like some connection with me, but I'm the outlier. The general kid isn't going to be fascinated by Shakespeare when you can't even understand it. I love poetry, and I bought a book of Edgar Allan Poe. I can't understand it. It doesn't make sense. So, and when that's all you're shown, I've literally had people tell me the only poetry they know is Shakespeare. So when I told them I'm a poet, that's what they expected. But I grew up on this show called, I discovered it on YouTube. I didn't grow up on it, but there was this show called Def Jam Poetry. And it was spoken word. It was people just coming on a stage and sharing their poetry, and different styles, different ways of doing it, rhyming, no rhyming. Sometimes there were two people, like it was all different stuff. It gave you variety. We don't have that exposure of variety to poetry. Music, you have everything. You have rock, hip hop, pop, underground, alternative. Even like you'll get here in the US, K-pop is huge. Like you'll get all these varieties of music, but with poetry, it's like here's Shakespeare, here's Poe, here's like just a couple of people. They're also usually men, so it's this thing of we don't. So the reason I think it hasn't grown is because spoken word is still like people don't even know what it really is. To be honest, in general. And so when they ask me, what kind of poetry do you do? I don't have an answer for that question because I don't know what you even mean by that. Like, I don't think you know what you mean by that. You don't know what poetry is usually. So like, what do you, so it's really interesting. But like, I write and I perform work. Like for me, my poetry is literally just me sharing a story in a somewhat artistic and kind of flowy manner. It's really all it is. I don't often use abstract metaphors and all these different, concepts, at least not when the content I perform. I write a lot of that, but the content I perform is just me sharing a story, really. Do I think it'll blow up? No. I think even if hypothetically I were to get really, really famous, I don't think the genre as a whole gets the attention that it should. I think it'll still stay at this level. Like, you have people like Rupi Kaur, who's like huge and like people love her work and it's great. And it's inspired a whole bunch of Instagram poets and it's really cool. But I don't think poetry itself is valued the same. I don't know if it ever will, because it's just, until we change that of how people learn about poetry and discover poetry and understand poetry, I don't think it changes.
That's, I asked that question because Jose Manuel, he's the only guy I know in the UK, so that's why I'm quoting him. The reason I actually went to a staging of his, but the amount of people that were there were like 800 people there. It was huge. It was huge. I mean, and he was talking about the first time he actually performed, and there was like something like 8 people there, and he's gone from that. And it's called Scala. It's in Euston, London. It's well known. It's had big names there, like huge stars that have performed there, and he had a sellout gig there. So for me, and it worked. It really worked. I was sort of familiar with some of his work, so people sort of resonate with that. And there were people actually, speaking with him. Like people sing along. They're actually doing that. So for me, I think it's going to. I do think it's going to blow up. I think it's going to be huge, and I think it's a genre because I've actually heard people, I've actually on YouTube and things, and I've been close to tears because actually a lot of the spoken word, a lot of poetry is something, as you say, it's got to be from your experience. Or there's this one about anxiety and panic and how this girl saw her anxiety as like friends with benefits. Well, I think it really does speak to people's inner self personally. So that could be you.
Well, I agree with your point. And I think that's the biggest thing is what I meant by it is like if we start putting it in front of people, because once people see spoken word, like I've had so many people tell me that they didn't know what to expect when they saw me walk on stage, especially looking the way I do and everything. Like they didn't know what to expect, and then they were absolutely blown away. And now they have much more appreciation for poetry. We just need to put it in front of more people,
Yeah.
and that's probably the biggest issue. Because I do think it's fully capable of resonating on that level with people. It's just like any other genre of art where it has the ability. I think it's, to me, poetry is the mother of all art, honestly. Because whether you're painting or you're telling a story or you're doing a song, like it all is poetry. Like for me, that's how I view it. You're telling the story, you're creating this picture, this image, this idea to connect with people. So it is all poetry. That's really what poetry is. And so I want to make poetry big. Like that's one of my goals is I want poetry on, at least here in the US, right? The mainstream radio station, by like at least locally, because there's stations all over, but like that would be one of my goals. That is one of my goals, is to get one of my poems on a mainstream radio station. I also want to sell out Madison Square Garden, which is so ridiculous, but that's my goal.
Is it ridiculous though? It's got to
I
start
mean, it
somewhere.
is, but in the best way possible. Like, I think
Yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
lovely. Yeah, it's not like, oh, it's so impossible. It's just like it's ridiculous, but I don't care if it's
I,
ridiculous.
I would love you to do that, and then I will just literally shoot this video to you. You know, however long it takes, that would be amazing.
That's
I'd
the
love to
goal.
see that. That would be amazing. Um,
Yeah.
I want to know how your family sort of have now accepted. Obviously, you told them 10 years ago, or however long, sorry, 2011, that you know you wanted to go into poetry. Now they've seen how popular you are. What's their take on it now?
Oh, they've been on board for years, honestly. It took them a little while, and they were still, after I graduated college, especially, I didn't have a job in my field because my field is just difficult. Film and television isn't an easy industry to break into. Neither is poetry. Like being a performer is not something that just happens, right? You can't just, not everybody can just go to America's Got Talent or whatever show's Got Talent, and I actually auditioned for America's Got Talent once.
Did
It was
you?
one of the worst experiences ever.
Oh,
um,
really?
yeah, I waited for 7 hours to perform for 90 seconds for like a audition. It was just a waste of like, it's a whole different thing. But like, all I'm saying is that these kinds of shows, that process promotes this idea of like making it big and the easy ticket out for so many hardworking people who literally just want to make a chance, like get a chance to show who they are. And it's just, it's it's insulting to me that you
Yeah.
have all these thousands of people at this one location waiting and waiting and waiting, and then they just do this 90-second thing. And people probably think I'm bitter because I didn't get it. I don't care. But it's like I just think it's absurd. It's like it's the epitome of like the American dream of
Yeah.
like you have to work hard, but you're competing against all these other people who are working just as hard. And like it was almost like I'm standing next to like a 6-year-old girl who's like likes to sing. How am I supposed to feel if I got that spot instead of her? Like that's just messed up, right? So it was just, I'm not a fan of that experience, and I have to write a poem about that one day. Total sidetrack, but no, my parents have been really, really supportive. My dad actually, he has a poster from one of my shows taped to his mini fridge at work.
Oh,
He tells a lot of his clients about me. He'll like share my YouTube links and all that stuff.
oh,
They're the most supportive people of what I do, um, and I'm so grateful that like they have only ever wanted me to do well. So when they told me like, oh, get a job in something else or do something else in the meantime, it wasn't to deter me from my goals. It was just in their view, that's what I needed to do to make a living. But in my view, it's if I put all this effort into looking for another job, I'm taking effort and energy away from what I actually want to do. So it doesn't make sense to me. So we only ever, clashed in that way, but it was never them saying, don't do it, don't do it. They always said like, we want you to do it, but understand you should do these other, pursue in the meantime, making money and things like that, which I get. But yeah, they've only ever been supportive, and I'm truly like their support has been all that has ever mattered to me at this point. I don't care if like even my relatives don't support, they do, but I wouldn't care if my relatives said, you know, like, oh, this is stupid. They don't say that, but I have had relatives tell me that I should do other things sometimes. But their words are irrelevant because I have my parents' support, and that's really just it. That's all that matters.
That is really lovely to hear. That's lovely to hear that you've got really supportive parents. And I'm going to sort of end with a question. So, what advice would you give to young people out there that want to get into the spoken word poetry? What would you, and obviously they have the insecurities that you had at that age. What advice would you give to them?
Interesting twist on that question. First things first, just write as much as you can. That's all I did for that whole summer of 2011, is I just wrote. I just all came out of me, poured out of me, and I just kept writing, and work on your, just, my biggest thing is, it takes a lot to really grasp the idea, but if you really want to do it, you'll find a way. I think that's just like a lesson for life. It's not even just like a career. It's, priorities are a thing that people don't, I feel, really pay attention to, like what their priorities really are. You know, I don't ever like to say I'm too busy to people, because the truth is that I just have other things I want to do instead of talk or hang out with them. And I don't mean that maliciously. I just mean I have my priorities, and like creating content or hanging out with this person is more important because I'm better friends with them or whatever. And it's not to be rude or disrespectful to anybody, but that's just life. We have only so much time and energy in a day to do things. So make it your priority. If you make it your priority, you will not fail because you want it to happen. And the biggest thing is, do not have a backup plan.
That's actually a really good one.
Because if you have a backup plan, you've set yourself up for failure, in my view. Because you're now like, oh, well, if I don't do this, then I can just go to this thing. But if you never gave up, how do you really fail?
Yeah.
Right? If you're never giving up, then you're not failing. You're just working you're working until you do make it. As for the insecurities part, yeah, like I write my struggle. I write through my struggles. My writing is what helps me work through things. So maybe writing isn't your outlet. Maybe it's, you know, your passion, but it's not your outlet. Maybe you need something else. Maybe you do need to talk to someone. You have to find your outlet for how you can, you know, work through those insecurities, those struggles, those personal, you know, challenges.
That's amazing. Nav, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. I really appreciate it. I think you are inspiring a lot of people out there. And also I've listened to your stuff and it really does resonate with me. You know, it really does hit a nerve, you know, and that's a link into people. And I just think if you're doing it so positively by exposing yourself, I think you're going to do great, and I think you're going to be huge. So thank you so much for coming on, and I appreciate everything, and good luck to you and the future as well.
No, thank you for having me. This was wonderful.
Thank you.